Ever since I filmed my last video and I learned once again that Malcolm X was 6'4".
B-I to the S-E-X-U-A. It's a L if you hating on me, bitch, I slay. No, I am.
It raised a lot of questions, like, how tall was he? Was he bi? Oh my God, you're lying on a Muslim man, or he would have never done that, or that's not him, like you can't lie on the past, or he was a man, and blah, blah, blah. I don't care. I'm here to give you research. You draw your own conclusions.
And y'all like to say we selfish, and y'all say we like to cheat, but I don't date both at the same time. Haters have a seat. I like girls, oh my gosh, big booty, big tits. I like guys too, though, super sexy, big dick. And if you hating on me, ho.
Was Malcolm X bisexual? And why or why not doesn't matter. When we think about this, we can think about gay panic. We can think about whether or not exploring this is discrediting his legacy. We can think about whether or not these allegations are true. The paper trail behind if Malcolm X was bi is very interesting to me. This video is gonna break down my research process, explore some of the different research considerations that I learned while digging into this. And then at the end, we're gonna talk about some of the reasons why or why it doesn't matter whether or not Malcolm X was bisexual, whether it be gay panic, or whether it be the fact that this is just like a salacious rumor that makes people think about. So first, we should probably talk about who Malcolm X was. Malcolm X, born Malcolm Little on May 19th, 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska, was a prominent African-American civil rights leader and advocate for Black empowerment. His journey towards activism began in prison, where he educated himself extensively, particularly through the teachings of Nation of Islam. After his release in 1952, he became a minister and prominent spokesperson for the Nation of Islam. But however, in 1964, he broke ties with NOI due to ideological differences and allegations made against Elijah Muhammad for his extramarital sexual affairs and his affairs with young women. Malcolm X continued his activism to be the founder of the Organization of Afro-American Unity and traveling extensively to spread his message of Black pride, self-determination, and unity. And eventually, Malcolm X was tragically assassinated on February 21st of 1965 in New York City. And I did another video on my channel about Malcolm X's and James Baldwin's relationship, and I kind of addressed some of the bisexuality there, but if you want to learn more about Malcolm X's perspective on nonviolence and how him and James Baldwin were friends, check out that video on my channel. Some other things I want to mention about Malcolm X is that he, near the end of his life, worked with the writer Alex Haley to make an amazing autobiography about his experiences, his life, his activism, what radicalized him. Malcolm X is known for being a charismatic and angry and fiery orator. He is such a smart man. And he's also known for being a very big critique of Martin Luther King Jr. up until the last year or two of Malcolm X's life, because Malcolm X was very much against the nonviolent direct action strategy because he believed that it compelled Black people to believe in the intrinsic kind of morality of whiteness and white people, when, as far as his racial and religious perspective, a lot of white people are the devil. I think he's funny. I think he's charismatic. I think he knows how to work a crowd. When I think about this bisexuality or sexuality question, maybe his ability to work a crowd, where I'm like, this is a little bit of queer culture. I don't want to assume anyone's sexuality, but I also know that Black history is filled with queer and historical erasure, especially of LGBTQIA people. And I will also say, I do think there is this interesting kind of gray area in how we name and understand sexuality as it changes through time, because what people might have called gay or bisexual or queer in the past is different than our associations and relations to it today. Immediately when I started researching this, one of the first things that comes up online are a few different Reddit threads that explore this question 3 years ago in the Black LGBTQ Reddit. So I read a few articles saying Malcolm X was bi. I've read the autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley. Alex Haley was good friends with Malcolm and basically just told Alex Haley what to put in the book. And this goes on to question the same-sex experiences, whether or not this is true from 3 years ago. And there's a bunch of different responses, people saying, I've seen Malcolm X several times and I've never seen or heard of him having sexual relations with men. These Reddit threads are interesting because you can really see people going to town. There's another one from 9 years ago that is from a Guardian piece called Malcolm X Was Bisexual. And these Reddit threads, I think, are evidence of the fact that people are curious. As far back as 10 years ago, people were wondering, was Malcolm X bisexual? This Bruce Perry book, which I'm going to talk about a lot later, was published, I believe, in 1991, and it even says on it that it was the first complete biography of Malcolm X. But essentially, throughout this book, there are various references to Malcolm X potentially being bisexual. So in his younger years, hanging out in Harlem and other places in New York, this book talks about the kind of places that he frequented and the people that he would meet. And some of these would be bars, speakeasies, where there would be sex workers there. And this section of the book reads, Small's Paradise was not Malcolm X's only schoolroom. He spent considerable time in an after-hours speakeasy named Creole Pete's, which opened for business at 3 a.m, just before the last of Harlem's legitimate bars had to close. Pete Robinson, the owner, had a big gap between his upper front teeth, just as Malcolm did, but what made him notice Malcolm was that he didn't buy any drinks. Nor did he try to pick up women. He just stood around the small, cramped makeshift nightclub, studying those who did. Pete, who was not operating a charity, finally cornered him and said, This is a drinking establishment, young man. Yes, sir, Mr. Robinson, Malcolm replied. May I carry those dishes for you? Allow me to hold that tray. Each time Creole Pete made up his mind to put him out, Malcolm ingratiated himself in some other way. Malcolm also learned a lot at the Harlem rooming house where he slept. Several of the tenants were prostitutes, some of whom Malcolm befriended. He said he trusted them more than he trusted women who weren't prostitutes. After all, a street walker couldn't really disappoint you. Surprisingly, Malcolm X's sex education came primarily from the prostitutes, not from Bia, whom he still saw, but was apparently more a showpiece than anything. The instruction, Malcolm said, was entirely verbal. A bout he had with the clap may have had something to do with it. But though Malcolm said he preferred to sleep with women who cared for him, the sexual partners he picked. And there are various parts of the book where the author, Bruce Perry, talks about how he did not intend to write a biography about Malcolm X. And then in 1971, with the help of John Fitzpatrick, the Massachusetts Commissioner of Correction, the author obtained access to Malcolm X's voluminous prison record, which led him to Malcolm Jarvis, one of the 2 or 3 men Malcolm's autobiography transformed into the fictional character Shorty. Jarvis, in turn, led Bruce Perry to dozens of people who had known Malcolm when he was a teen hustler. One of them was Gloria Strother, whom he wanted to marry. Aided by court records, Bruce Perry located the young sister of the white woman who had been Malcolm X's girlfriend during the 60s. When I telephoned and requested an interview, she was receptive. Another section of the book, in a chapter titled Part-Time Hustler, it reads, this is a section of the book where Malcolm is really in need for money before he goes to prison, and it reads, Malcolm also worked ostensibly as a butler for a wealthy Boston Braham whose living quarters overlooked the Boston Common. His bachelor employer, William Paul Lennon, was hazy about the exact nature of Malcolm's duties when he was questioned about them, nor did he say why he hired a male to do what he characterized as general housework. There was good reason for Mr. Lennon's lack of clarity. According to Jarvis, Lennon paid Malcolm to disrobe him, place him on his bed, sprinkle him with talcum powder, and massage him until he reached climax. Lennon, who was virtually the same age Earl Little would have been if he had lived, was old enough to be the gentle, loving father Malcolm had never wanted. Malcolm would later assert that someone else, not he, was given Lennon his satisfaction, though another man did take part in some of the rubdowns, Malcolm himself actively participated. He later described the proceedings to Jarvis. Like a prostitute, he sold himself as if the best he had to offer was his body. Malcolm X's income-producing homosexual activity was sporadic. Nevertheless, it may have been an impediment in his quest for a satisfying masculine self-image. It constituted a key link in a chain of events that included the absence of appropriate male role models, tyrannical females at home and school, the excessive demands that had been made on him, the fact that there was no one to teach him how to meet those demands, his fear of combat, his unavenged trouncings at the hands of Bill Peterson, Hank Ross, and others, the shock he apparently felt when he discovered a milky substance seeping from his breast, his unsatisfying sexual experiences, and his inability to support himself or make his way in a competitive, bigoted world. Perhaps that is why he asserted years later that a man's greatest urge is the need to feel masculine. And I think this section is interesting because there are certain assumptions about Malcolm X's psyche that I think this author is making that some of the later critiques that I'm going to bring up will address. So in some of the reading, I'm kind of like, is this a white man writing about Malcolm X? And let's look up a picture of Bruce Perry. Yeah, it's a white man. What I think is essentially interesting there is that it's breaking down how the world emasculates Black men and what that in turn leads Black men to do. And there is a lot of interesting kind of analysis and considerations in this politics. There's the fact that Malcolm X was on the streets. There's the fact that he was a part of like Black culture. There's the fact that he was like in street culture, like selling drugs, helping pimp people out. And so there is a very clear vision of masculinity that I think these spaces demand of people. You have to be machismo, you have to be tough, you have to be strong. But similar to how I kind of analyzed how James Baldwin speaks with Nikki Giovanni in his conversation with Nikki Giovanni in my other video essay, if you haven't checked that out, you should. There is this sort of socio-political need for people analyzing these Black male figures to skirt over the fact that this need to feel masculine, I think a lot of these academics are rationalizing it in a way that I think there is more room for criticality. And this isn't to say that I believe that everything that Perry is saying, but it is to say that I don't think it is a logical kind of jump to say, oh, he didn't have any like clear male role models and he was in the streets, so it made him want to be masculine, which made him want to be with men. I think there is a bit of like a dissonance in this logic that I don't think is really respecting the complexity of what a queer experience could be if Malcolm X was queer or LGBTQIA. But I do like that this is exploring some of the places that Malcolm X frequented, the kinds of people that he met, how he might have thought about sex work or prostitutes, and how when you're in spaces with people and you need cash and you need money, sex work is a way that a lot of people find money. There are a lot of resources and writers and sex positive and sex work positive anarchists and far leftists out there that write and talk about sex work much greater than I could. So I will put some of those up on screen. There is something to be said about the fact that I think we have to consider the complexity of what Malcolm X's street lifestyle might have been like and the kind of things that he might have resorted to make money. And gay for pay sex work wouldn't be the most surprising thing to me. You know what I mean? And then there is another section in this text. It's earlier on. It's in a chapter called The Long Hard Road. And this basically talks about some experiences that Bruce Perry claims through interviews that Malcolm X had that when he was younger, that he might have sexually experimented with other boys his age. But there is more references to this in Bruce Perry's book. So if we go from Bruce Perry's book to reading what Malcolm X writes about his own life and sexuality and political expressions in his famed autobiography, The Autobiography of Malcolm X, there is one section that kind of speaks to the combination of characters that Bruce Perry asserts were kind of funneled into this character of Shorty. And I want to read this in Malcolm X's own words. In a section of the book, Malcolm X is essentially talking about some of the people he met from the streets and how some of these people eventually led to him engaging in a robbery, which eventually led to him being incarcerated. He writes, Rudy's mother was Italian. His father was a Negro. He's born right there in Boston, a short, light-skinned fellow, a pretty boy type. Rudy worked regularly for an employment agency that sent him to wait on tables at exclusive parties. He had a side gig going, a hustle that took me right back to the old steering days in Harlem. Once a week, Rudy went to the home of this rich, old rich Boston bluebud, pillar of the society aristocrat. He paid Rudy to undress them both, then pick up the old man like a baby, lay him on his bed, then stand over him and sprinkle him all over with talcum powder. Rudy said the old man would actually reach his climax from that. I told him and Shorty about some of the things I'd seen. Rudy said, as far as he knew, Boston had no organized specialty sex houses, just individual rich whites who had their private specialty desires catered to by Negroes who came to their houses camouflaged as chauffeurs, maids, waiters, or some other accepted image. Just as in New York, these were the rich, the high society, the predominantly old men, past the age of ability to conduct any kind of ordinary sex, always hunting for new ways to be sensitive. Rudy, I remember, spoke of one of the old white men who paid a black couple to let him watch them having intercourse on his bed. Another couple was so sensitive that he paid him to sit on a chair outside a room where a couple was he got his satisfaction just from imagining what was going on inside. And what I think is interesting here is that if you look at Perry's text and you look at Malcolm X's text, the description of the sex work involved is the same. And I will say this as a memoirist, as a writer myself, I published my first book 2 years ago. It's titled When They Tell You to Be Good. When you are writing your own memoir, and granted, Malcolm X was working with Alex Haley. Malcolm X passed away partway through the writing of this. From the studies that I've done, Alex Haley took some license to kind of craft the story after Malcolm X passed away. But when you're writing memoir, you take considerations on what to include. It's a very common thing that if you don't want to tie everything to like the actual factual event, but you want to express what happened, people recommend changing 3 details about a person or combining characters or combining stories or where things are referenced. And I'm not going to speculate that Malcolm X necessarily did this. For writers, this is a very real literary tool that writers use to not necessarily lie about the past, but to restructure it in a way that makes the author comfortable with what they're exploring or writing about. And so from that perspective, I think these similarities can kind of maybe signal to the fact that this maybe was a part of Malcolm X's writing process, rearranging things, making sure that things were expressed in a way that was comfortable to him, and that could also speak to a kind of deeper or more essential truth. There is a critical perspective on these different allegations about Malcolm X being bisexual, and I want to bring this in because it's not only important to kind of talk about, was he bi? What kind of gay was he? Blah, blah, blah. I don't know. So there are critiques of some of these allegations of Malcolm X being bisexual. And I'm going to read a particular piece from Malcolm X's daughter where she responds to some of these. Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention by Manning Marable. There is a response piece where basically Malcolm X's daughter was interviewed about her perspectives on this book. And I haven't read this book yet. Let me know if you want me to do another video where I explore some of the allegations or the things mentioned in Manning Marable's book. But in this particular article, the interviewer asks Ms Shabazz if she's read Manning Marable's book, and she responds, I actually skimmed through it. I was really surprised that his research would be so limited, and some of the accusations, actually, I guess I could call them speculations, that he didn't really have much evidence. And if I think to put some of the things he put in that book without having some real accurate evidence, it was surprising to me. The interviewer goes on to ask, did this author interview you? And she basically says, I had 6 sisters, and in the 20 years it took this author to do this book, a lot of them died. And then she even says, I had many discussions with the author, but he never explicitly said, interview you for this book. The interviewer asks, but he never discussed your parents' interpersonal relationships. Is that the part that most concerns you about what you've heard so far? You say you haven't read the book in its entirety, but is that the part you take issue with the most? And then Malcolm X's daughter responds, right. I think the things that I take issue with are the fact that he said my father engaged in a bisexual relationship, a homo. You know, he had a gay lover who was an elder white businessman, I think in his late 50s when my father was in his teens. And you know, my father was an open book, and we actually have 4 of the missing chapters from the autobiography. And you know, he is very clear in his activities, which nothing included being gay. And certainly he did not have anything against gay. He was for human rights, human justice, you know. If he had a gay encounter, he likely would have talked about it. And what he did talk about was someone else's encounter. Oh, and the interviewer then goes on to ask, is it possible that this author had access to information you did not? And then Malcolm X's daughter says, not at all. I mean, listen, I have a lot of friends who are gay. I have, you know, I hate to say, but some of my best friends are gay, okay? So if my father experienced persons of the same sex before he became the icon Malcolm X, you know, then that would be his experience, but he would have spoken about it. And I think because there are so many other allegations, especially that my mother cheated on him with his best friend when he was in Africa, if we even consider that the FBI looked for a very long time for something to get on my father, something to discredit or tarnish his image, then certainly they would have found the information. And even Dr. Marable puts in his book that the FBI files indicated that Malcolm X was a saint. And then it goes on to say, so, you know, if my father had these, you know, relationship with a man, if my mother had extramarital affairs, you know, I don't have a problem with accepting that my parents aren't perfect. They are human beings, but that is not the case. And I think it's unfortunate that you would have scholarly men put this kind of stuff in a book for sensationalism. Reading this, it does give me a lot of pause and consideration. Malcolm X's daughter is coming at this in a very respectful way. She's being very direct. I mean, some of the way she talks about, like, I have gay friends. It's like we all can kind of be like, But I think she's being very clear. My father didn't have anything with gay people. He didn't have any problem with human rights. She also talks about all these other allegations that are against her family, that to some degree these allegations could have been spread by the FBI in their pursuits of the COINTELPRO program.
Fred Hampton seemed to know that he was being threatened by something in the shadows.
COINTELPRO was a clandestine program that J. Edgar Hoover had started, and it targeted all the movements, but in particular the Black movement. But Hoover had a particular thing for the Panthers, who he said were the greatest threat to the security of the U.S.
COINTELPRO, short for Counterintelligence Program. It was launched by the FBI in 1956. But as the revolutionary atmosphere of the US came to a simmer in the 1960s, so too did the FBI's covert surveillance of activist groups.
It was not public, but in all cities that had Panther offices, all the heads of the offices were directed to come up with hard-hitting programs attacking the Panthers. And their motive was to disrupt, destroy, and neutralize the Panthers by any means necessary, prevent the unity of Black nationalist groups. And there was one other COINTELPRO objective that was specifically an order from Hoover to the FBI offices: prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the Black masses.
And so it is interesting that Mrs. Shabazz is bringing in the fact that if the FBI was really surveying Malcolm X, would it not make sense that they would eventually find this kind of information? If we're thinking about Bruce Perry's kind of timeline of when Malcolm X might have allegedly engaged in more queer LGBTQ relationships, it would have been in his teenage years. It would have been in his 20s, which probably would have been the time before he was even on the FBI's radar, because he wasn't even really a part of the Nation of Islam. I understand and I get everything that Malcolm X's daughter is saying, and I think she brings in a lot of great points about why I kind of make so much content about James Baldwin and why I'm excited to dive more into these discussions about these different aspects of history, is because I think romanticism of these political figures can also make it so easy to sensationalize certain aspects of them or attach to a certain aspect to suit our own needs. And I can say this kind of like exploration of whether or not Malcolm X was bisexual or was he queer does kind of feel like it falls into that category of contemporary audiences wanting to latch onto something else to have a different level of relatability to this person. This is kind of besides my later considerations that I want to dig into about why it might matter whether or not Malcolm X was bisexual, but in terms of nostalgia and romanticism, it might be important for us to be critical of especially white people when they're writing about these figures, these movements, these histories, because really, how credible is Bruce Perry and Manning Marable in the writings that they did, especially if Malcolm X's daughter talked to Manning Marable over numerous years and is like, yeah, he never actually asked if he could interview me. And then there is another Guardian piece that came out in 2005 titled Malcolm X Gay Black Hero. And in this piece, it reads, in New York, two of Malcolm X's friends from Michigan remember bumping into him at the YMCA, where Malcolm X bragged he earned money servicing queers. Later, Malcolm worked as a butler to the wealthy Boston bachelor William Paul Lennon. So in ending off this video, I really want to take seriously the question of, was Malcolm X bisexual? Was he LGBTQIA? And why doesn't it matter? And the first kind of consideration when I think about exploring this question, especially as a queer person myself, is the whole gay panic defense. Malcolm X came up in very machismo political cultures and spaces, being in the streets, being in prison, being in Nation of Islam. If you read his book, it literally says like, Nation of Islam says that a man should marry a woman half his age plus 5. When we're looking at how compulsive heteronormativity encourages straight people or straight passing people to rely on gay panic or gay panic responses, to turn away from sexuality, to turn away from homosexuality, to turn away from homoeroticism, there is this very real question in my mind, whether or not Malcolm X was bisexual, why is it such a big deal? And I get it in terms of not wanting people to lie on your history and not wanting to discredit it and not wanting to fabricate or sensationalize things, because I do think this is a very kind of sensational thing, especially the fact that so many people think that Malcolm X was fucking hot and they'd want him to take them home. But the other part of it is that I do see this conflict between sensationalizing a figure because it's exciting or cool or interesting, and also wanting there to be an openness to how we approach history and understanding that, to me, to some degree, homophobia and not wanting someone's history to be diluted by being queer or being seen as feminine is a very real part of why some people react to this question of whether or not Malcolm X was bisexual. He was a strong man. He took care of his family. He wouldn't have. Malcolm X was smart. He was cool. He was interesting. He probably did some interesting shit in his teens or 20s that maybe he readily wouldn't have talked to every single person about, especially his family or his children once he became a family man. But this is also me assuming the dynamics that he probably had with his wife and children, which is a whole nother topic. When I posted about this online before, there's a lot of people that are just like, you can't say that about him. And I'm like, why not? Like, if he was queer, it would make Malcolm X even cooler. Other serious question I have, why does it matter if he was really gay versus the spectacle of it? And I think this is what Mrs. Shabazz, Malcolm X's daughter, is really speaking to. It's kind of saying like Malcolm X represented all these serious things. He was contentious to the state. He called out state powers. He faced white supremacy. He was surveyed and followed by the government. He was assassinated. And we want to talk about whether or not he was gay is kind of how I read how her interview comes across. Interesting to think about, because if I'm holding myself to task, I think for me, in a sense, it's kind of a comfort to kind of think of whether or not Malcolm X was bisexual. It's a comfort to think about the fact that he engaged in these more subversive parts of sexual and social culture. Because when I was really doing my video on James Baldwin and Malcolm X and how they kind of felt an affinity towards each other, I just had this vision in my mind of them being like queer besties who could like hang out and talk to each other and confide in each other. And I mean, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily true. The deeper answer is that it's hard to look back at history and to really confront the wrongs, the flaws, the things that we often overstep in order to not confront the realities of what we experience today. And so sometimes when we dip into history, it is kind of fun to like dig into a question or a topic or something that is kind of regularly ignored and isn't really accounted for, especially in the mainstream space. A lot of Black communities' avoidance of this topic is the fact that they don't want to think about Malcolm X like being a top or a bottom, or wanting to go down on somebody, or being at the gay clubs, or rubbing talcum powder on this old white man. There is this aversion to any speculation or rumors that can emasculate Malcolm X. And I think that is the part of this where I kind of feel some resistance, even though I do want to respect the complexity and the reality of history. It's the weird part for me, because I'm like, why does it matter? Does it matter because it makes him less of a strong, tough, burly man with a gun looking out the window for you? Or does it matter because you just want people to understand the truth about him? How we find out the truth about historical figures, I think, is both an individual process for the people that are directly born of his legacy, people in his family, people that knew him, his peers. And I think also how we navigate history is a collective process. What kind of questions are we asking? What kind of assumptions are we bringing to certain histories? And how do those factor into what we know or what we could know? Was Malcolm X bisexual? Was he not? I don't know if we really reached a clear conclusion in this video, but I do think looking back at these different texts, looking at the criticisms of them, of the things that people are engaging with about them, there is a lot of gray area out there. Do you think that Malcolm X was bisexual or LGBTQIA, and the more likely outcome is the fact that he did some stuff in his late teens and 20s that he probably wouldn't talk about because he became a family man later on? Or do you think that this stuff is sensational? These authors are trying to profit or benefit off of this famed revolutionary's legacy by bringing in allegations or facts that might not be fully substantiated by the level of research or lack thereof that people like Mrs. Shabazz speak to? Or is it something in between? Is our nostalgia and attachment to history compelling us to see things as they were not? Or is our curiosity guiding us in a place where maybe we're getting a little bit closer to the truth? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching this video. I regularly post kind of polls on my community section of my channel. If you want to help me, because Pride Month is coming up, My goal for Pride Month is to get to 15,000 subscribers. I really think it's possible. I really enjoy posting these videos and making this content. I think modeling conversations and explorations of history is something that is so useful to me, and all of this stuff is actually helping me research collections of essays that I'm actively writing about James Baldwin and Black masculinity. And so all of these topics are not only helping me, but I hope they're helping you engage in deeper questions about how we relate to Black history and what the function of it is. As if you want to learn more about my life, my political perspective, all the different organizing I've done, the different travels I've done, especially in the footsteps of Baldwin, I have a book that came out 2 years ago. It's titled When They Tell You to Be Good. Consider buying a copy of it. It's really close to my heart. I talk a lot about the emotional realities of activism. I talk about what it was like growing up queer in a Jamaican family, what it's like being a part of movements like Standing Rock, Black Lives Matter, what it's like to confront state violence, and what it also means to confront patriarchal violence and what it means to come from it. And this book is very much a project of my heart, and I hope it can be a blueprint for younger people that are figuring out how to be anti-capitalist in the world, how to be queer, how to be dynamic, and how to be gentle and powerful. I hope it's a blueprint for people that are looking for all of those things in one single text. Thank you for watching this video, and let me know what else you want to see for Pride Month, because I have other ideas. Until next time, see you later.